I was elbow deep in a dumpster behind a foreclosed mansion when my ex-husband's voice floated up like a bad smell. Nobody's going to want a broke homeless woman like you. I tightened my grip on a carved chair leg and kept digging. Tuesday, 7 a.m., and the neighborhood still smelled like old money and fresh lawn fertilizer. The bank had padlocked the iron gates 2 weeks ago. Ever since, the curbside piles were a scavenger's map, mahogany with one missing foot, linen lampshades with faint water rings, a mirror spidered at the corner but still catching light. Not trash. Raw inventory. I hauled myself out, wiped grime onto jeans already past saving, and set the chair leg carefully in the cart I'd found behind a grocery store. If I could match the wood grain and turn a new foot, that chair might pay for a week of storage and 2 days of food. 3 months earlier, I'd still had a front door that locked from the inside. I'd had a wedding ring, a mortgage with both our names, and an architecture degree that lived in a frame instead of a box. Richard used to tuck stray hairs behind my ear and say, "I make enough for both of us. Why stress?" It sounded like love until it became a leash. He forgot my licensing exam registration, booked surprise trips during client calls I'd begged to take, laughed when I sketched at night. "Cute hobby," he'd say, gesturing at my notebooks. "Focus on the house, Ava. We have guests this weekend." The affair was almost a relief, proof I wasn't paranoid, just sidelined. The divorce was a bloodletting. He brought lawyers and polished shoes. I brought a folder and stubbornness. The prenup I'd signed at 22, romantic then, ruinous now, made quick work of dividing a life we'd built with my silence. He kept the house, the car, the savings. I kept a suitcase, a storage unit, and the echo of his final gift, damaged goods. So I learned the weight of wood and the language of scratches. I watched repair tutorials on a cracked phone and bartered refinishing for shower access. Every evening I rolled open the storage door, spread plastic, and turned wreckage into something someone might set a vase on. It wasn't glamorous. It was mine. A breeze lifted dust motes into little galaxies. I strapped the cart and started toward the bus stop, palms stinging, shoulders burning, heartbeat steady. Rock bottom didn't feel like falling anymore. It felt like ground, solid enough to push off. The sun had barely climbed over the rooftops when the world tilted again. I was loading my latest finds. Onto the city bus. 2 cracked picture frames and a half-broken stool when a sleek black Mercedes pulled to the curb. The tinted window slid down, and a woman in a charcoal suit leaned out, crisp and polished like she'd never sweated a day in her life. "Excuse me," she called. "Are you Ava Sinclair?" I blinked. My first instinct was defense. Repo agent? Debt collector? The storage company again? I gripped the stool like a shield. "If you're here to take something, this is all I own." Her smile didn't falter. "I'm not here to take anything. My name is Victoria Chen. I'm an attorney representing the estate of Theodore Sinclair." The world went still. For a second I thought I'd misheard her. "You mean Uncle Theo?" My voice cracked on the name. Victoria nodded. "Yes, he passed away 6 weeks ago." "I'm sorry for your loss." My throat closed. I hadn't seen my great-uncle in 10 years. Not since the day I chose marriage over architecture, and he told me flatly, "You're building yourself into a cage." I'd hung up on him, furious. I'd sent cards, left voicemails, tried to bridge the silence, but he never replied. I assumed he'd erased me. He left me something. I managed. Victoria opened her leather folder and handed me an envelope. "Everything, actually. You're the sole heir to his estate," I laughed. Out loud, a harsh, unbelieving sound. "That's impossible. He cut me off years ago. There's got to be a mistake." "There's no mistake," she said gently. "Mr. Sinclair never changed his will. You've inherited his assets, his Manhattan residence, vehicles, investments, and controlling ownership of Sinclair architecture." I stared. "I haven't worked as an architect in my life. I fix furniture in a storage unit." "Then this might come as a shock," Victoria continued, "but the firm alone is valued at roughly $47 million. The stool slipped from my hands and clattered onto the sidewalk. 47 what? She smiled faintly. 50 million total, if you include the estate. The words buzzed like static in my ears. 50 million. I couldn't even keep my prepaid phone active for more than 2 weeks, and now this woman was telling me I owned a company. There's There's got to be a catch, I said. There is one condition, Victoria admitted. Mr. Sinclair stipulated that you must take over as CEO of Sinclair Architecture within 30 days and maintain the role for at least 1 year. If you refuse, everything transfers to the American Institute of Architects. I barked a laugh that sounded half-crazed. CEO? I'm living off canned beans and Craigslist sales. I haven't even drawn a floor plan in 10 years. Mr. Sinclair believed in your talent, Victoria said softly. He told his partners you'd return someday. This was his way of giving you that chance. The city noise faded behind the thudding of my heart. My uncle, the man who'd paid for my education, who'd taken me to construction sites as a girl, who'd taught me to see beauty in steel and glass, had never stopped believing in me. Even after I'd abandoned the career he'd built for me, I didn't know whether to cry or run. Victoria glanced at my dirty hands, my worn jeans, the stool at my feet. Perhaps we could discuss this somewhere more comfortable. My car's right here. I hesitated, glancing down at the garbage bag holding my life's possessions. I'm not exactly Mercedes ready. The car can handle dust, she said simply. That strange combination of grace and authority made me follow her. Inside the car, the leather smelled of something expensive and far away from hunger. As we drove, she handed me a folder thick with documents. It was real. The Sinclair estate, the firm, the assets. Pages and pages of legal proof. My name printed in bold type. Photos of the Manhattan property slid free. A brownstone I recognized instantly. I'd seen it once in Architectural Digest. 5 stories of Victorian elegance fused with modern brilliance. Theo's masterpiece. I can't accept this, I whispered. He didn't even speak to me. Victoria's tone softened. He may not have spoken, but he never stopped caring. You were always his beneficiary. I stared out the window as skyscrapers blurred by, disbelief hardening into a strange mix of fear and awe. You have 29 days to decide, she added. But if you accept, we leave for New York tomorrow morning. I looked down at the folder, the fortune, the legacy, the impossible chance to start again, and then at my calloused hands. I'll do it, I said quietly. When do we leave? 8 a.m., Victoria replied, smiling. Pack light. I thought of the garbage bag in the trunk, 1 suitcase, a laptop, and a decade of regret. Trust me, I said. Packing light won't be a problem. The next morning, the hotel mirror nearly didn't recognize me. I'd scrubbed the grime from my skin until my knuckles hurt, trimmed my hair with shaky hands, and borrowed a blouse from the complimentary closet that actually fit. For the first time in months, my reflection didn't look like a cautionary tale. It looked like a woman who might belong somewhere again. Victoria arrived precisely at 8. Sleep well? She asked. Better than I have in months, I said truthfully. The bed had felt like a cloud after the concrete floor of the storage unit. Good, she replied, because we have a busy day. We'll visit the Sinclair estate first, then meet the firm's board of directors. I swallowed hard. The board. The words sounded like they belonged to another species. The flight to New York was silent except for the low hum of engines. I stared out the window, watching clouds slide by like pages of a new chapter. Yesterday, I'd been digging through trash. Today, I was flying first class. The absurdity made me laugh quietly into my sleeve. Victoria glanced over, amused. Adjustment period? Something like that. I still half expect to wake up in the storage unit. If it helps, she said. Mr. Sinclair predicted that reaction. He told me, she'll think she's dreaming. But once she sets foot inside the house, she'll remember exactly who she is. The plane descended into a glittering sprawl of glass and light, Manhattan, the city I'd once dreamed of conquering before I let love rewrite my ambitions. The car wound through tree-lined streets before, stopping in front of a towering brownstone. Even from the curb, I could tell it was one of Theo's designs, his signature mix of Victorian grace and modern innovation. Iron railings intertwined with solar glass panels, stone carved with hidden motifs only visible in certain light. It looked alive, like it breathed history and future in the same moment. Welcome home, Victoria said. The words hit harder than I expected. Home. It had been so long since that word meant anything. The front door opened before I reached it. A woman in her 60s stood there, gray hair tied neatly back, eyes warm and teary. "Ms. Sinclair?" she asked, voice trembling. "It's been a long time. Do I know you?" She smiled softly. "I'm Margaret. I was Mr. Sinclair's housekeeper for 30 years. And before that, I took care of you for a time, after your parents passed." Memory sparked. A gentle hand on my back, cocoa on sleepless nights, the smell of lavender soap. "Margaret," I breathed. "You made me grilled cheese when I refused to eat anything else." Her eyes misted. "You remember?" She opened her arms. "Welcome home, dear girl. He always hoped you'd come back." Inside, the estate took my breath away. Every inch felt deliberate. Sunlight pouring through tall windows, marble staircases softened by wood tones, and art everywhere. Sketches, models, blueprints. My uncle's fingerprints were in every detail. Margaret led me upstairs. "Your uncle's suite is on the 4th floor," she said, then hesitated. "But he had the 5th floor converted into a studio, for you." I stopped on the landing. "For me? When?" 8 years ago. 8 years ago when we weren't speaking." My chest tightened. Why would he do that? Margaret's smile was bittersweet. "Because he never stopped believing you'd find your way back." The 5th floor was a dream frozen in time. Drafting tables lined the walls beside wide windows overlooking the city. Every surface was covered with pristine equipment: mechanical pencils, ink pens, rulers, digital tablets, all perfectly organized. On one wall hung something that made my throat close: a framed print of my college exhibition design, the one Theo had said would change the world. I touched the glass gently. He kept it. "He was proud of you, Ava," Margaret said softly, "even when he pretended not to be." Tears stung my eyes. The guilt I'd buried for a decade came rushing back. How I'd chosen marriage over mentorship, silence over pride, comfort over calling. But standing in that room, surrounded by the evidence of his faith, I felt something shift inside me. Maybe it wasn't too late. A knock came at the door. Victoria stepped in with a tall man in his late 30s, dark hair threaded with silver, sharp suit, eyes that assessed before they softened. "Ava, this is Jacob Sterling," Victoria said. "He's the firm's senior partner and worked with your uncle for over a decade." Jacob extended a hand. "You're the Ava Sinclair," he said. I blinked. "There's another one?" He smiled. "The one who designed the Green Horizon Community Center model at 21. I've studied your early work. It was brilliant." Heat rose to my face. "I haven't designed anything in years." "Doesn't matter," he said simply. "Talent doesn't vanish. It waits." Victoria cleared her throat. "We should head to the board meeting. They're expecting you." "Expecting me?" I echoed. Jacob's expression shifted. "Expecting you to decline honestly. Most assume you won't take on leadership. You've been out of the field too long." I met his gaze, something stubborn igniting in my chest. Then they'll be surprised. We drove to Sinclair Architecture's headquarters, 3 glass floors of modern elegance overlooking Midtown. As I stepped through the revolving doors, heads turned. Whispers followed. I caught snippets. That's her. The niece. The heir. The conference room was vast, lined with models of famous projects. 8 board members sat waiting, their faces unreadable. Victoria began. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Ms. Ava Sinclair, the new CEO of Sinclair Architecture." A man in his 50s, Carmichael according to the nameplate, leaned back. "With respect, Ms. Sinclair has no professional experience. Mr. Sinclair must not have been thinking clearly when he wrote that clause." I inhaled slowly. "Actually, he was thinking perfectly clearly," I said, steadying my voice. "He built this company on innovation, not intimidation. Maybe he knew it needed fresh eyes." I placed my battered sketchbook on the table, pages full of ideas I'd hidden for a decade. These are sustainable designs I've worked on in my spare time, projects that merge classical form with modern environmental systems. I may not have practiced, but I never stopped learning. Carmichael sneered, but others leaned in, flipping through my sketches. A woman nodded appreciatively. "These are strong concepts." "Running a firm takes more than concepts," Carmichael said coldly. Agreed, I said. That's why I'll rely on experienced partners, like Jacob, and the teams my uncle trusted. I'm not here to replace brilliance. I'm here to lead it, silence settled. Then Jacob spoke quietly, almost to himself. Theodore was right. About what? I asked. He met my eyes. That you'd come back stronger than anyone expected. For the first time in years, I smiled and meant it. I wasn't just inheriting a company. I was reclaiming my purpose. A week later, the words Ms. Sinclair CEO still felt foreign on my tongue. The glass office overlooking Midtown had once belonged to my uncle, his desk polished to perfection, his leather chair still carrying the faint trace of his cologne. But now, every blueprint, every decision, every expectation rested on me. The first few days were chaos disguised as professionalism. Board members tested me with questions laced in condescension. Clients watched me like a novelty act. Yet every time I faltered, I remembered Theo's voice. Architecture isn't about walls. It's about conviction. Jacob became my silent anchor. He walked me through contracts, client meetings, and the maze of office politics. He never spoke for me, only gave me the space to find my own footing. One afternoon, as we stood over a model of a new museum, he said, "You don't need to prove you're Theodore Sinclair's heir. Just prove you're Ava." That night, I stayed late in the office, reviewing designs until my eyes burned. My computer pinged, an email from Carmichael to all senior staff. Effective immediately, all design proposals require board approval before presentation. My pulse quickened. That was not protocol. It was sabotage disguised as policy. I hit reply all. This policy is rejected. Sinclair Architecture thrived because it trusted its architects. Board approval applies only to projects exceeding $10 million as outlined in the charter. Ava Sinclair, CEO. Within minutes, Jacob appeared at my door, eyebrows raised. You just made Carmichael look foolish in front of the entire senior team. Good, I said, shutting my laptop. Men like him count on women staying quiet. The next morning, Carmichael marched into my office, red-faced. I've been here 23 years, he barked. I built this firm's reputation long before you showed up. I leaned back in Theo's chair. Then you should know better than to undermine the company's values. You can work with me or against me, but if you choose against me, you'll lose. For a heartbeat, silence. Then he stormed out. Jacob appeared moments later, grinning. That was brutal. I exhaled, hands trembling. Brutal is pretending not to know what I'm worth. I've had enough of that. That night, I explored Theo's private study. Inside a locked drawer, I found folders labeled with my name, clippings, photos, college designs, even my wedding announcement. Beneath them, a sealed letter dated 2 months before his death. Ava, if you're reading this, you finally came home. You've always been my successor, not because of blood, but because of brilliance. You only needed to remember who you were. I kept something for you in the studio. Use it wisely. I'm proud of you, always. Theo. Tears blurred the ink. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like an imposter. I felt like an architect. The next morning, I went straight to the studio Theo had built for me 8 years earlier. Morning light spilled through the glass walls, illuminating rows of drafting tables, untouched for years. I opened the bottom drawer of Theo's old filing cabinet and found what the letter hinted at. 17 leather portfolios labeled failures. Each contained Theo's hand-drawn blueprints, smudged lines, revisions, abandoned concepts, notes scrawled in his familiar handwriting. Too rigid. Lost harmony. Start again. I smiled through tears. These weren't failures. They were reminders that even brilliance comes from imperfection. On the final page, Theo had written, "Brilliance isn't born complete. It's built one imperfect sketch at a time, just like you." That was the spark. That day, I called Jacob into my office. "I want to start a mentorship program," I said. "A fellowship in Theo's name, to give young architects what I once had, a chance." Jacob tilted his head. "Ava, that's ambitious. Paid mentorship, real projects, and it'll cost a fortune." "That's the point," I replied. "It's an investment, not charity." Theo believed architecture should serve people, not just prestige. Within a month, the Sinclair Fellowship launched. We opened applications nationwide for 12 spots, fully paid, open to students from underrepresented backgrounds. By the first week, we had over 300 submissions. I reviewed every one of them, remembering what it felt like to be young and unseen. One portfolio stopped me cold. A student named Emma Rodriguez, whose designs blended affordable housing with community gardens. Her sketches were raw, passionate, and full of heart. "She reminds me of you," Jacob said quietly. "She reminds me of who I wanted to be," I corrected. Emma joined the first cohort that September. She was shy at first, uncertain, but her ideas were alive. I gave her a real challenge: design a prototype for a homeless shelter using sustainable materials. The senior architect scoffed. Too risky, too inexperienced. But I saw potential. I stood by her. 3 months later, Emma's design became the blueprint for a city-funded housing project in Brooklyn. The press picked up the story. Young architect's vision revitalizes Sinclair architecture. Reporters wanted to interview me, but I pushed Emma forward instead. "She's the story," I told them. "The future of architecture isn't legacy. It's renewal." That was the beginning of something bigger than I'd imagined. Under my leadership, Sinclair architecture began to change. The firm's reputation shifted from elite to visionary. We took on projects no one else wanted: schools in underfunded neighborhoods, green community centers, adaptive reuse of old industrial spaces. Every design meeting began with the same question I wrote on the board: who will this building serve? Clients started noticing. So did the media. Architectural Digest reached out for a feature on the revival of Sinclair architecture. They photographed the studio Theo had built, my fellowship students and me, standing beside the same drafting table where I'd once dreamed as a child. When the article was published, I read the headline 3 times before it felt real. From rock bottom to blueprinting the future, Ava Sinclair's architectural renaissance. The photo showed me smiling, genuinely, for the first time in years. But transformation wasn't just about headlines. It was internal. I stopped apologizing for taking up space in board meetings. I trusted my voice. I started dressing like a woman who ran a company, not one pretending to fit in. I even returned to my old notebooks, the ones Richard had mocked, and found ideas worth building. The firm's engineers turned one of them into a real project: a sustainable waterfront library. At the groundbreaking ceremony, as cameras flashed and construction crews cheered, I thought of the woman I'd been 18 months earlier, crouched behind a dumpster, covered in dust, clinging to broken furniture like it was hope. Now, standing under a steel framework I'd designed myself, I finally understood what Theo meant. Architecture wasn't just about creating structures. It was about rebuilding lives, starting with your own. Jacob joined me on stage, whispering, "He'd be proud of you." I looked out at the skyline, sunlight glinting off glass and steel. "He already told me," I said softly, because somewhere in the pages of a letter, my uncle had given me the greatest blueprint of all, not for buildings, but for becoming whole again, and I was finally, fully, building. The first time Jacob reached for my hand, it wasn't romantic. It was grounding. We were walking back from the Brooklyn site at dusk, exhausted but elated after Emma's presentation had gone flawlessly. The streetlights shimmered against puddles left from a light rain, and for the first time since taking over Sinclair architecture, I allowed myself to breathe. "You know," Jacob said quietly, "when Theodore told me he wanted you to run this company, I didn't believe him." I looked up, half amused. "Thanks for the vote of confidence," he smiled, unbothered. "It's not that I doubted your skill. I just couldn't imagine anyone living up to him. But now," he hesitated, "you haven't just lived up to his legacy, Ava. You've surpassed it." I stopped walking. His words settled deep, right where old insecurities used to live. "You really think so?" "I know so." Something in the air shifted. The world felt softer, quieter. For a long moment, we just stood there, 2 people who had carried the same grief in different ways, both of us shaped by Theo's absence and guided by his faith. From that evening on, Jacob and I fell into an easy rhythm. Late nights at the office turned into dinners. Strategy sessions turned into laughter. He wasn't like Richard. There was no dominance, no ego disguised as charm. When I spoke, Jacob listened. When I hesitated, he waited. One night, as we reviewed the next phase of the fellowship program, he looked over the table at me. "Do you ever think about what Theo was trying to teach you with all of this?" "All the time," I said. "He didn't want to hand me success. He wanted to make sure I'd earned it, so no one could take it away again." Jacob's expression softened. "He succeeded. You've rebuilt everything he dreamed of, and you did it your way." The conversation hung there, unspoken feelings crackling beneath it. When he reached across the table to tuck a stray strand of hair behind my ear, I didn't pull away. That night, after years of emptiness, I finally felt something real, not a rescue. Not dependency, but connection. We didn't label it. We didn't need to. We just built it, piece by piece, like every structure worth keeping. Months passed. Under our leadership, the firm flourished. New contracts, new reputation, new energy. The Architectural Digest article had gone viral, and invitations to speak poured in. I traveled to conferences, talking about design and resilience, about how architecture could rebuild not just cities but people. And yet, despite the applause, it was the quiet moments that mattered most. Jacob and I sketching side by side, coffee mugs balanced on blueprints, laughter echoing through the studio Theo once designed for me. But healing wasn't a straight line. Some nights, I'd wake up from dreams of the past, Richard's voice sneering, "No one will ever want you." The echo would linger, but then I'd feel Jacob's hand on mine, warm and steady, pulling me back to the present. "You're safe," he'd whisper. "He can't touch you anymore." And he was right. The more I built, the more I healed. The woman who once scavenged discarded furniture now restored herself instead, sanding away the damage, rebuilding the structure underneath. Love had found me, but not as a fairy tale ending. It arrived as partnership, quiet, respectful, patient. One evening, standing on the rooftop garden Theo had designed decades ago, I turned to Jacob and said, "I used to think strength meant never needing anyone. Now I know it means letting someone stand beside you." He smiled. "Then we're both strong." Below us, the city lights shimmered like a living constellation. I thought of Theo, of everything I'd lost and rebuilt, and for the first time I realized love wasn't the reward for healing. It was the proof I already had. It started with a message I almost ignored. "Congratulations on your inheritance. Guess you landed on your feet. We should talk. R." The initial R hit like a ghost knocking on a locked door. Richard. I hadn't heard from him in over a year, not since the divorce. The man who told me no one would ever want me. The man who'd taken everything and still somehow wanted more. I stared at the text until the letters blurred. Jacob found me in the studio, frozen, phone still in my hand. "Who is it?" "Richard." Jacob's jaw tightened. "Do you want me to handle it?" I shook my head. "No. I've handled him enough for one lifetime." I deleted the message, blocked the number and told myself it was over. But it wasn't. A week later, Architectural Digest published a follow-up on the Sinclair Fellowship, photos of our Brooklyn project, interviews with Emma, even a paragraph about how I'd gone from homelessness to CEO. It went viral. Within days, my name was everywhere. That's when Richard crawled out of whatever corner he'd been hiding in. He started with emails. "I'm proud of you. I miss us. We should catch up." Then came the guilt. "You wouldn't be where you are if I hadn't supported you all those years." I didn't reply. But the silence seemed to feed him. He messaged Emma next, through LinkedIn. "I used to be Ava's husband. Please tell her I'd like to congratulate her personally." Emma came straight to me, pale and nervous. "Did I do something wrong?" "Not at all," I said gently. "You did exactly right." I told her to block him. Jacob was furious when he found out. "He's trying to find cracks. Ava. Looking for ways to make you react." "He'll get nothing from me," I promised. "But predators don't stop when you say no." They escalate when they sense indifference. A week later, a formal letter arrived at the office. Legal letterhead. Richard Foster was suing me. The claim was absurd, that my success as CEO was built on marital assets, that the education and experience I gained during our marriage constituted joint property. He wanted a financial settlement, millions. I laughed out loud reading it, the kind of laugh that comes right before tears. Victoria, my attorney, didn't laugh. "It's ridiculous," she said, scanning the papers, "but strategically designed to exhaust you. It'll take time and money to fight." Jacob paced behind her, furious. "He's doing this because she's visible again. Because she's happy." Victoria nodded. "Exactly. We'll respond decisively. Ava, do you still have any written proof of how he treated you? Messages, journals, anything?" I hesitated. "I kept everything." That night, I dug through boxes I hadn't opened since leaving him. Old notebooks filled with sketches and pain. In between floor plans, I'd written fragments of memories, the things I wasn't brave enough to say aloud. He canceled my job interview. Said I wasn't ready. He threw my sketchbook in the trash. He called me pathetic for applying for a grant. Pages and pages of slow erosion, catalogued like evidence. When I handed them to Victoria, she flipped through quietly. "These aren't just notes," she said. "They're documentation of systematic emotional abuse. We're countersuing. Defamation, harassment, and psychological damages." Jacob's eyes widened. "You're sure?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady. For years I let him decide the story. Not anymore. The court hearing arrived faster than I expected. The press caught wind, of course. Ex-husband of rising architect claims stake in her inheritance. I ignored it all. I'd been humiliated before. I wasn't scared of the spotlight anymore. In the courtroom, Richard sat across from me, perfectly groomed, smug in his expensive suit. The same charm that once disarmed me now looked hollow. When his lawyer called him the supportive husband who enabled Ava's success, I almost laughed again. Then Victoria stood, calm, surgical. She laid out every journal entry, every text where he'd dismissed my career, every message where he'd mocked my education. She read his exact words aloud. "Nobody will ever hire you. You're nothing without me." By the time she finished, Richard's face had gone ashen. The judge's ruling was swift. "Mr. Foster, this claim is without merit and appears retaliatory. You have no legal or moral claim to Ms. Sinclair's success. Case dismissed with prejudice." Outside, cameras waited. Reporters shouted questions. "Ms. Sinclair, how do you feel about today's verdict?" I smiled, exhaustion laced with relief. "Vindicated," I said. "For 10 years, I let someone else define my worth. Today, I reclaimed it. He tried to break me, and instead, he made me stronger." Jacob slipped an arm around my shoulders as we walked past the flashing lights. "You didn't just win, Ava," he whispered. "You closed the book," but I shook my head. "No, Jacob, I didn't close it. I rewrote it." That night, back at the Sinclair estate, I opened one of Theo's old failure portfolios. On the last page, he had scrawled, "Sometimes destruction is just the first draft of creation." I traced the words, finally understanding. Richard hadn't just been my destroyer. He'd been my draft, the messy, painful version of who I needed to outgrow before I could design something better. And now, standing on the rooftop under the Manhattan skyline, I knew. The woman he'd broken no longer existed. Only the architect remained, of buildings, of second chances, and of her own story. The week after the trial, I returned to the firm feeling lighter than I had in years. The noise of the courtroom, the headlines, Richard's bitterness, all of it had faded into the background hum of a closed chapter. What remained was purpose. That Monday morning, Victoria appeared at my office with an envelope sealed in wax. "This was part of your uncle's estate," she said. "It was to be given to you exactly 1 year after you assumed leadership, provided you fulfilled the condition." "The condition?" I asked. "To uphold the company's legacy with integrity." I opened it slowly. Inside were 2 documents. One was a new trust fund agreement. The other, a handwritten letter from Theo Ava. "If you're reading this, it means you've proven what I always knew. Leadership is not about profit, but purpose. If you've rejected any offer to sell Sinclair Architecture, this final trust, $30 million, is yours to use as you see fit. Build something that lasts longer than our name. Build something that matters. With pride and love, Theo. I sank into my chair, breath catching. He'd planned even this. One last test to ensure I valued the mission over the money. 2 days later, the board gathered for an emergency meeting. Patricia, one of Theo's oldest partners, slid a proposal across the table. Ava, we've received a $300 million acquisition offer from Marcus Chen's firm. He wants to absorb Sinclair Architecture. Gasps rippled through the room. Jacob's eyes met mine immediately. It's a trap, he murmured. I scanned the terms. A total buyout. Marcus would gain control of every project, every design, every fellowship. In exchange, I'd gain wealth beyond imagination and lose everything that gave it meaning. No, I said, the words sharp and final. Patricia arched a brow. Are you certain? That's generational wealth, Ava. Theodore didn't raise me to sell his legacy to someone who measures worth in profit margins, I said. We're not for sale. A slow smile spread across Patricia's face. Good. That's exactly what we hoped you'd say. What? She handed me another envelope, the second part of Theo's condition. He left this instruction. If Ava Sinclair rejects any major acquisition, release the final trust. She will have proven that her inheritance is in her convictions, not her account. When the meeting adjourned, I walked to the rooftop garden. The city stretched beneath me. Jacob joined me there, quiet as the evening wind. You realize, he said softly, he's still testing you, even from the grave. I smiled, watching sunlight catch the skyline. Not testing me, teaching me. He wanted to make sure I knew the difference between inheritance and legacy. Jacob brushed his fingers over mine. And now you do. I looked out over the city I once thought would crush me. Yes, I whispered. I finally do. Theo hadn't left me a company. He'd left me a purpose, proof that the truest inheritance isn't wealth. It's the courage to build something worth passing on. Spring arrived in New York like a promise, the kind of soft sunlight that made the skyline shimmer and reminded me why Theo had loved this city so fiercely. 1 year had passed since I'd inherited the company, and Sinclair Architecture had become something entirely new. Not a monument to one man's genius, but a movement built on collaboration, mentorship, and second chances. But Theo's story wasn't finished yet. A week after I rejected Marcus Chen's acquisition offer, Patricia called me into her office with a small velvet box. Theo left this too, she said. He instructed me to give it to you only after you proved that you valued legacy over wealth. Inside was a ring, a simple gold band etched with tiny blueprints. Beneath it, a note in Theo's precise handwriting, Ava. This ring belonged to Eleanor, my wife, your great-aunt. She was one of the first women to practice architecture in the 1950s. The world tried to shrink her, but she built boldly anyway. When she died, I promised I'd give this to someone worthy of her legacy. That someone is you. Wear it not as jewelry, but as a blueprint, a reminder that courage is the foundation of creation. I am proud of you. Theo, I slipped the ring on my finger, and for the first time, it felt like I was wearing not just his legacy, but mine. Jacob found me on the rooftop that evening, the sunset painting everything gold. He really thought of everything, didn't he? He said, smiling. He always did. He hesitated, then pulled something from his pocket, a small velvet box of his own. My heart stuttered. Ava Sinclair, he said quietly. I've watched you rebuild from ashes, lead with heart, and turn pain into power. I don't want to stand beside you because of what you inherited. I want to stand beside you because of who you are. Will you marry me? For a moment, all I could do was laugh through tears. You realize this rooftop is cursed for surprises, right? He grinned. Then let's make it a tradition. Yes, I whispered, my voice breaking. 1,000 times yes. When he slipped the ring onto my hand, it glimmered beside Eleanor's. 2 legacies, one past, one future, perfectly aligned. Our engagement announcement spread through the architecture world within hours. Messages flooded in. Congratulations, partnership proposals, even an invitation from a global design consortium. But what mattered most was how it felt. Peaceful, honest, earned. Then, one final letter arrived. Margaret found it tucked in Theo's study, addressed to both of us, Jacob and Ava. If you're reading this together, then I was right. You make a formidable team. A company, like a marriage, stands or falls on how its foundation handles stress. Keep building each other the way you build your projects, with respect, vision, and courage. And please don't name any children, Theodore. That name dies with me. Oh, my love, we laughed until we cried. It was so perfectly Theo. Sentimental, wrapped in sarcasm. A month later, we were married in the rooftop garden he had designed. Emma stood as my maid of honor, radiant in a green dress she'd chosen herself. Margaret cried through the vows, clutching the handkerchief Theo had left for this very occasion. Jacob's vows were simple. You taught me that true architecture isn't about buildings, he said, voice trembling. It's about rebuilding ourselves until we stand tall again. When my turn came, I took a breath. You saw me when I was still rubble, I said. You didn't rebuild me. You reminded me I was always whole. As we kissed under the city lights, I knew the circle was complete. Theo had given me blueprints. Life had given me wreckage. I had built something stronger than both, a future that couldn't be inherited, only created. That was my final triumph. Not the wealth, not the recognition, but the understanding that I was never meant to receive a legacy. I was meant to become one. 5 years later, I stood at the podium of my old architecture school, looking out at hundreds of graduates in their black caps, eyes bright with the same hope I once carried, before I traded it for a cage. When I graduated, I began. I thought I had everything figured out. I had a degree, a plan, and a future that looked perfect on paper. Within a year, I gave it all up. For love that wasn't love. For comfort that became control. The auditorium was silent. I lost everything. My home, my savings, my confidence. I believed the lie that I was too broken to rebuild. But then life gave me something unexpected. A second blueprint. I smiled, remembering Theo, remembering the day Victoria found me behind that dumpster. You see, architecture isn't just about buildings. It's about foundation. When it cracks, you don't abandon it. You reinforce it. You design again. You learn from every collapse. A murmur rippled through the audience. The students leaned forward, their faces open, hungry for truth. Not textbook lessons, but something real. When I took over Sinclair Architecture, I continued. People doubted me. They called me inexperienced, unqualified, lucky. And maybe I was lucky, but luck doesn't build legacies. Grit does, courage does. The decision to keep creating when everything tells you to quit does. I looked down at my hands, one ring glinting beside another, Eleanor's and my own. Theodore Sinclair left me money, yes, but that wasn't the inheritance that changed my life. The true inheritance was belief. In people, in purpose, in myself. The applause came slowly, then built like thunder. Afterward, a young woman approached me, notebook in hand, voice trembling. Mrs. Sinclair, your story? It's the reason I didn't drop out this year. I thought failure meant I wasn't good enough. I smiled, recognizing that fear. Failure just means you're building something real. Keep sketching. The lines get straighter the more you draw. That night, back on the Sinclair rooftop, I watched the city glow beneath me. Jacob was inside finishing plans for our newest project, a community art center in Detroit. And Emma was now leading her own firm, mentoring new students the way I once mentored her. Theo's words echoed like wind through steel. Build something that lasts longer than your name. I realized I already had, because legacy isn't about fortune or fame. It's about the people you lift, the dreams you pass on, and the strength you prove by standing back up. Once, I thought I'd inherited a company. Now I knew the truth. I'd inherited the courage to rebuild, and the responsibility to teach others they could. 2. Message to listeners. No matter how far you fall, no matter who tries to convince you that you're not enough, Remember this. You are the architect of your own life. You can rebuild from ashes. You can design your comeback. You can turn every wound into wisdom and every ending into a foundation. The world might try to make you small, but your story, your courage, is proof that you were always meant to rise higher than they ever imagined. So build bravely, build beautifully, and never ever let anyone shrink the person you were born to become.